New videos every day.
Today I'm joined by Dr. Colin Ross. He is an author and psychiatrist based out of Dallas, Texas. And he is a leading expert on the CIA mind control experiments, especially MKUltra. So thank you so much for being here with us today.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Can you just start by giving us a brief background of MKUltra and what are the facts that can be known about that declassified program?
There's actually quite a lot of declassified information, and it really starts, first of all, with the formation of the CIA in 1947, and then a couple of programs called Bluebird and Artichoke that began in 1950, and they really rolled over into MKUltra, which started in 1954, ended in 1963, and then MKUltra rolled over into MK Search, which ran until 1972. Wow. So it's really a continuous set of projects, 1950 to 1972. And after that, basically everything is still classified.
Okay. And so in the 1970s, most of the information or most of the documentation about what had gone on was actually destroyed. Is that correct?
What we're told is that in 1973, Richard Helms, who was then the director of the CIA, ordered the destruction of all mind control documents, MKUltra and related programs. But apparently 7 boxes survived in an archive and were discovered later. And those are the now public domain documents that I've investigated that other people have read.
Okay. So what were the primary intentions behind these mind control experiments?
The mind control experiments had several different purposes, not just one. If you look at the MKUltra projects, there was 149 of them, and they roughly divide 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. So 1/3 were basically contracts to acquire certain chemicals, compounds, mushrooms, and so on. So they're just industrial procurement contracts, basically. About 1/3 were relatively benign, kind of academic research contracts, scattered around a whole set of different universities. And most of the time on those, the money would go from the CIA to a front organization, and then from the front organization to the investigator. And the investigator would be unwitting, meaning that he didn't know it was CIA money.
Okay.
And then in 1/3 of contracts, the investigator was cleared at top secret, was witting, and knew there was CIA mind control money. And those ones were hypnosis, sensory deprivation, isolation, LSD, a whole bunch of different projects, which were bits and pieces of the overall mind control program.
Right. And so, we hear about, the Manchurian Candidate, this idea that the CIA was actually doing these mind control experiments to create assassins or to create people that they could otherwise control. Is there truth in that, or is that kind of maybe an isolated incident? Like, what is the truth in a statement like that?
The Manchurian Candidate is basically based on the book and the movie, The Manchurian Candidate, which was then remade by Denzel Washington a few years ago. And it's really, of course, the Hollywood version is fiction, but it's based on fact. And when I say fact, I mean clearly documented in great detail that going back to the Second World War, these people were operational and used in a whole variety of different types of missions. What it really is the Manchurian Candidate is an artificially created multiple personality, where you, through a variety of techniques, create a new identity inside, and then there's some sort of code word, and the identity can be called out, given the mission assignment, and the regular person has amnesia for the mission. And so the idea, as far as I can figure out, is if the person's captured and interrogated, they're more resistant to interrogation because the out front person doesn't have any knowledge of the mission.
Right.
And these are described in documents going back to a book published in the 40s, up to the early 70s, a newspaper article, and in the declassified CIA documents. They describe real-life simulation experiments combined with operational use. And it's in detail, it's very clear.
Right. So what about, some of the people that that were supposedly a part of these experiments, like they say the Unibomber and of course like Ken Key. Is there truth in those statements? Like, are there still people walking around today that were part of these experiments that are still perhaps being affected by that treatment?
The actual programs where Manchurian candidates were operational are embedded in a whole large set of experiments. So you could be in, say, an LSD experiment at Edgewood Arsenal as a soldier, and that's all you were involved in. You took LSD 2, 3, 4 times, nothing more. Or you could be involved in just a sensory deprivation experiment. Or you could be involved in the whole program to create the Manchurian Candidate, which would be probably a relatively small number of people.
Right.
But in terms of being involved in documented experiments, for sure, the Unibomber was an undergrad at Harvard, and while he was an undergrad at Harvard, he was involved in 2 things. Dr. Murray was doing basically sort of Guantanamo Bay enhanced interrogation experiments, back in the decades prior. And Kaczynski was a subject in those experiments for a good chunk of his undergraduate years. Very coercive, overwhelming interrogation experiments where you were tearing the person down, tearing down their belief systems.
Right.
And he was also involved in LSD experiments where the LSD was supplied by a Dr. Robert Hyde, who was a top secret MKUltra contractor on 4 or 5 different sub-projects. All of that completely documented.
Okay.
Ken Key, Allen Ginsberg, Timothy Leary, all of those guys first got LSD from Army, CIA psychiatrists, and that is also all documented.
Right. So how many people would you estimate were subjects in any of these experiments?
Yeah, the exact number is basically unknown, but if you just do the arithmetic in the mid-70s, 76 I think it was, the General Counsel for the U.S. Army in some Senate hearings released a list of about 125 different compounds that the Army had tested and said that LSD alone, there was 1,500 subjects. It's probably actually more like 4,500.
Wow.
But if you figure just the Army, and this is just what they're admitting to, 125 projects, 1,500 per compound, and then you look at the other branches, the military and the CIA, it adds up to tens or hundreds of thousands of people got at least one dose of some mind control compound. So it's not just, a few hundred people or a few thousand. It's a large number of people.
Wow. In one of your videos, you talk about a little girl who received electric shock treatments. And you said that she received something like 103 treatments with 6 actual shocks per treatment. And that she's still alive today. She's 25 years, she doesn't have any memories from before she was 25 years old.
Right. She was actually not a little girl when she was brought into the experiment. She was 25 years old.
Right.
And I have her medical records. She's received compensation from the Canadian government. Again, this is all completely documented. And it was Dr. Ewan Cameron at McGill in Montreal, who was a MKUltra contractor, a very big guy in world psychiatry, American Psychiatric Association, and so on. And his experiments were exactly what you described. So she's brought into the hospital, referred by her family physician, sort of mildly to moderately depressed, a bunch of young kids, a lot of stress as a mom,
Right.
but not severely mentally ill. And she thinks she's just coming in for help with her depression. She ends up with 103 electric shock treatments from May to September 1963. In each of those treatments, she got 6 times the normal dose of electricity.
Wow.
She was also subjected to prolonged drug-induced sleep and what was called psychic driving, where they play tape loops over and over and over and over and over with certain statements or instructions in them. At the end of this process, which is all documented in the medical records, she was incontinent of feces and urine, didn't know her own name, didn't know where she was, didn't recognize her husband, didn't even know what the concept of a husband was, and had to gradually relearn all of that. And then when I interviewed her in the late 90s, a vivacious, together, interesting, talented woman, no apparent psychiatric problems at all, complete amnesia from age 25 back to birth.
Wow.
And in the bluebird and artichoke experiments, the documents describe the problem of disposal of subjects. That's what it's called. And one way to dispose of subjects, of course, is to kill them. But other methods include wiping out their memories.
Right.
So obviously the CIA and the military are not interested in wiping out somebody's memories as a mental health treatment. It's all about intelligence and warfare.
Right. Why would you need to wipe out somebody's complete memories? So something like that, was that kind of an isolated incident of something so extreme happening? Or is that kind of, is that kind of the norm for experiments like that were being done?
The norm for experiments, there isn't really exactly a norm, because it ranges from very bland, benign, typical academic research through to experiments like the MKUltra Ewan Cameron experiments, where somebody's memory is wiped out for their entire life up to age 25, to experiments where one of the side effects is the person dies. And these are often published in mainstream psychiatric journals. So the strange thing is all this secret CIA funding, but slightly sanitized, cleaned up versions of the research were published in mainstream journals, including kind of casual statements that several of the people died.
Wow. Do you have any way of estimating how many deaths perhaps were a result?
There's really no accurate way of estimating the number of deaths that happened, because there's drug experiments done in prisons with incarcerated drug addicts. There was experiments at Georgetown University with terminal cancer patients, incarcerated sex offenders in Michigan, psychiatric patients, and then there was experiments on unwitting civilians. And there's no follow-up. So part of the ethics of this is you do these pretty dangerous experiments, which could cause medical problems, psychiatric problems, and then there's really no follow-up.
Right.
So it's basically impossible to guesstimate, but it wouldn't be one or two people.
Right.
It'd be I have dozens maybe, or possibly hundreds, but not 1, 2.
Wow, that really is incredible. That's about all we have time for in this video, but I hope that you will stay tuned, because in a future video, we're going to talk more about the specifics of some of these experiments and what might still be going on today. So please be sure to subscribe to Psychetruth, friend us on the Facebook, give this video a thumbs up, and share it with your friends. Thanks.